Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Run In Podcast. I am your host, Big Mike. Hope everybody's doing well. It is currently Sunday, July 28th, and we are back with another top 5 episode. Today, we are going to do the top 5 biggest heel turns, in my opinion, in WWE history. And look, there's a little background to this. As a wrestling fan, I am also a fan of a lot of movies, comics, pop culture in general. And it's San Diego Comic-Con, which is kind of nerd heaven in the universe, and a lot of big announcements and everything come out, and this list was inspired by an announcement that Marvel made in their panel last night. If you haven't seen it already, I posted something similar on X. Make sure you guys follow me on all socials at _Big Mike 27. But Marvel announced last night that they are bringing in one of the biggest villains in the Marvel universe in Doctor Doom. And the only person that they felt that could come in and play this role, who is a huge pivotal villain character for the new heroes, the Avengers that they made, that they will assemble, was the one and only Robert Downey Jr. And yes, your eyes don't deceive you. That is the same Robert Downey Jr. who in the Marvel universe plays one of the biggest heroes, who ultimately sacrificed himself to defeat Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet in Ironman. And that's kind of what inspired this. I thought to myself, how do you explain this in wrestling terms? I know there's a lot of crossover between superhero movies and wrestling. They take wrestling takes a lot of cues from superhero movies in a lot of characters and stuff that they do. But how, as a wrestling content creator, can I bridge the gap between movies and stuff that I love like this and the wrestling community that I'm trying to put out content for? So I thought, as with this being the biggest heel turn, so to speak, in movie history that I can think of. If you think of another one, please let me know in the comments. As far as movies are concerned, I don't know of any story arc where a guy plays a character who is literally the biggest hero, sacrifices himself to save the universe, and comes back as what is planned to be and what should be the biggest villain in that same universe. And look, I know there's a multiverse and all that. We won't get into all that here because that would take forever. But playing the biggest villain in that same universe. So I thought we would make a top 5 list of the biggest heel turns in wrestling history. And I'm going to focus on WWE because AEW hasn't been around for a very long time, only about 5 years. So, I mean, there's been some good heel turns there, but we're going to go kind of all time. We're going to include WCW, obviously, because they're kind of under the same umbrella as WWE. But just kind of to explain these, so if you're coming to this and you see the thumbnail, which has Robert Downey Jr., so you've come from this from Marvel, and you've always thought, well, how does wrestling kind of fit into my world? Well, these are 5 examples of exactly what happened last night when they announced Robert Downey Jr. as the biggest villain. And from a wrestling standpoint, if you've never watched the MCU, which I'm not sure there are many, I'm sure there are some, sorry. This is kind of what the correlation between what happened last night in a world you understand as the biggest heel turns in the history of the WWE and WCW. We're going to start off, and then this one probably has a lot of correlations to kind of what happened. And we're going to start off with Seth Rollins betraying the Shield. Iron Man in the MCU was a part of the Avengers, kind of the big hero team. You get a bunch of heroes and put them together and make a super team. That's kind of what the Shield started out to be. WWE took Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose at the time, and Roman Reigns, who are all powerhouses in NXT going through the developmental system, put them together, made the Shield, and from day one that the Shield came on the scene, they dominated. Eventually got into a feud with the Authority at the time, or the evil corporation kind of gimmick, kind of the same thing you see with the Avengers battling Hydra, things like that. It's kind of that same dynamic. Um, and pretty much just dominated the entire roster. And then you have this moment in 2014 where after defeating the Authority yet again, the Shield are standing tall. The heroes are getting cheered. And the big bad in the Authority, which at the time was Triple H, has to turn to a plan B. What was that plan B, you might ask? Well, that would be Seth Rollins betraying his friends and eventually killing the Shield. And this is huge for a few reasons. Obviously, you have this up and coming, really dominant faction in the Shield who are running roughshod over the entire roster. Being dominant. But going forward from this is what created the architect, Seth Rollins. This is what finally comes to Seth Rollins' form that we see now as a single star. This is kind of what catapulted him to that main event status. And not only that, it created two other main event stars in Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns. One of those we'll get to here in a minute. So, I mean, as far as just kind of the correlation between, starting at the Avengers or the Shield, coming back, turning into the big bad, and then kind of, being one of those big time forces of nature, forces to be reckoned with as the evil architect. Obviously everybody knows the story. He comes in, wins Money in the Bank, cashes in at WrestleMania, becomes champion, and evolves into, the visionary that we see now as Seth freaking Rollins. So, I mean, just the magnitude of that at the time really does correlate in the breaking up the team. Another person that kind of comes into this is, one of the biggest baby faces at the time, that you have Seth Rollins, who becomes this big bad. Well, turns into this, you have Roman Reigns turning into the biggest baby face in the company, whether the crowd wanted to or not. A lot of times they were very reluctant to cheer Roman Reigns, but he becomes the face of the company. He becomes the good guy, the next John Cena, the next Superman, beating guys that a lot of people, especially the internet, didn't want him to beat, wanted him to kind of, go a different direction with his character, through some fault of his and some of the promos he had, whether those are scripted or not. But you've got this huge hero babyface, not unlike Iron Man in our story in the beginning. But he also faces some hardship, which kind of gains more popularity and more ammunition with the fans. Through this build, he becomes a champion on his own. He starts being this big baby face, and then kind of real life slaps him in the face. He has to leave in 2018 when, famously he was diagnosed with leukemia earlier in his career or earlier in life. And in 2018, it kind of came back, and he had to leave again to get treatment for that, until, finally coming back in 2019, getting a good bill of health, reuniting the Shield, bringing the guys back together, becoming an even bigger force and babyface in there, only to have to leave again in 2019 due to the pandemic. Obviously, a global pandemic and a compromised immune system don't really go well together. So in 2019, he had to go away again, and there were even rumors that he may retire. He may never wrestle again. Thankfully, that was not the case. He did get better. The pandemic did subside, and in 2020 he came back, but it wasn't as the babyface that everybody remembers. He actually returned in 2020 and attacked The Fiend, as you can see in the picture there, and Braun Strowman, who were two big characters at the time, and birthed what has now become the Tribal Chief and one of the longest reign of a championship in WWE history. So without everything we've talked about, without Seth Rollins turning, without everything going up, this moment really never happens. So that's why these two are kind of correlated together, but they are also two of the biggest turns, because really nobody at that point really ever expected Roman Reigns to come back as a heel. They expected him to be the next John Cena and be a babyface for the next 20 years as John Cena was. So when he comes back, beats everybody up, you can see on the shirt there, wreck everyone and leave. That was kind of one of his original catchphrases when he came back, and came back with Paul Heyman, who had, Brock Lesnar had just gone away. Paul Heyman needed something to do. Brock Lesnar was kind of that in that same dominant heel role there. So fitting Paul Heyman in there gave him even more credibility as a voice of somebody that people thought was a heel. So he comes back, becomes the heel, becomes champion, and for 4 years after that, really 3 to 4 years, he's the biggest champion in the company, the biggest bad guy in the company, all right there at that turn. And that's kind of, the two newer examples of this happening that a lot of today's fans, younger fans, will know and will recognize. The other three on this list that we have are a little bit further back. They were more impactful on my life because they were when I was younger. And look, full disclosure, some of the names we will discuss in the next three have kind of had their own natural villain arc in the last few years. So if you start Googling some of these people, if you're not familiar with WWE and you're coming from the MCU side of this, and you start Googling some of these people, if you haven't heard of them, look, you're going to see some offensive or, troubling concepts and things. So full disclosure there. But going forward, the next one is kind of the one that created a movement, really. And that is in the next up with the rise of Mr. McMahon. Everybody remembers Survivor Series 1997. Bret Hart, one of the bigger stars in the company. The internet wasn't around back then, so a lot of people didn't know behind the scenes what was going on like we do now, because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have all the dirt sheets, we didn't have all the reports. But Bret Hart wasn't happy, so and was leaving the company, didn't want to lose, especially to somebody like Shawn Michaels. So in the main event, Vince McMahon, who wasn't Mr. McMahon at the time, was just Vince. He was a commentator. Nobody really on screen knew. The audience did not know his real role in the company. They just knew, hey, it's Vince McMahon. If you had some sort of insider knowledge, of course, you knew Vince McMahon was the son of Vince McMahon Sr., who had started the WWE and, or started the WWF back in the day. Then it became WWF after Vince McMahon took it over and kind of combined everything together and created this global juggernaut, the WWE. But it was never really shown on screen. It was always kind of behind the scenes in the background, and he was a commentator on screen. But this moment where, with Bret Hart not wanting to lose, Shawn Michaels gets Bret Hart into a submission hold, and suddenly the bell rings, which shocks everybody. We'll come to find out that Vince McMahon allegedly orchestrated this so that he would lose, not know about it, and it created what has forever been known as the Montreal Screwjob. The biggest on-screen scandal that the WWE had ever seen. And like I said, turns Vince McMahon into just an announcer and creates the on-screen authority, which, if was ever used before this, was used very sparingly. But this time it was prominent. He was the face of the heels or the bad guys in wrestling for the foreseeable future after that. And in this, really, when you look back in the history of wrestling, this is really what kicks off what us wrestling fans refer to as the Attitude Era in WWE, which, if you ever talk to a wrestling fan that hates wrestling today, a lot of times everybody says, I wish we could go back to the Attitude Era. I am not necessarily in that case. I thought the Attitude Era was good. I like what we have now too. I think in a lot of ways it's better. But for that period of time, this man became kind of like the Doctor Doom of the WWE, where there was no one more evil, no one more maniacal or sinister than Mr. McMahon pulling the strings from the background. And of course, once you have that character who's the big bad evil, you have to have somebody to go against him. You have to have your Iron Man. You have to have somebody that is going to stand up to authority. And for a lot of us in the Attitude Era, that was Stone Cold Steve Austin. Stone Cold Steve Austin comes up. He's loud. He's brash. He's vulgar at times. Shooting birds and cussing people. And he became the anti-hero to the establishment that was Vince McMahon and the corporation authority, whatever you want to call it at the time. They went by a few different names going forward, but he became that big presence. He was the Iron Man of the time. He was the man that took on Vince McMahon at every turn, beat him most of those turns, until 2001. As you can see, you hear me describe it, and you look at him and say, "Well, why is he shaking hands?" Well, in 2001, Stone Cold Steve Austin goes into a championship match against The Rock, who hit what has been built up to be, kind of like this is going to be the face of the company. They were the two biggest stars at the time, The Rock and Stone Cold. Both have had huge careers by this point, and it was kind of billed as the match of the times. So during that match and during the build up to that match, even Stone Cold had said, "I've got to beat The Rock by any means necessary. It has to happen. I have to beat him. This cements my career. I have to get this win." Lo and behold, in the match, there's a hard hitting match, great match. All of a sudden, Vince McMahon comes down to the ring, and everybody at the time is thinking, "Oh my gosh, the evil Vince McMahon is coming down to screw our hero again. He's going to kill our hero once again and cost Stone Cold this match." But wait, Vince McMahon actually helps Stone Cold Steve Austin, thus turning Stone Cold Steve Austin the biggest hero at the time, the guy that we all look to as the that flies in the face of the establishment, the biggest rebel that we all wish we could be, and flip off off of our boss at sometimes and cuss out our boss if necessary. Everybody's felt it, no matter how much you love your job. I guarantee you there's been at one point where you've wanted to do that at someone at your company. Don't come at me. But now you have Steve Austin shaking hands and making what we would call the deal with the devil, becoming the biggest heel right there at that time. Now, we won't talk about what happens after this because it didn't go down as well as this happened in general. It wasn't a great storyline after that. There wasn't a lot of great things that came out after that. But that moment where you were so high on this guy being the man coming through to save all of us from our entrapments of our jobs, especially if you didn't like your job, to now being in with them, felt like the biggest turn to a lot of WWE fans at the time. Now, to me, obviously, it is the second biggest turn, because I have it at number 2, because the one at number 1 really hits a lot more because of the magnitude. So a lot of people know the name Hulk Hogan as it applies to wrestling. Came in the 80s and 90s, was the biggest star in all of wrestling. Transcended wrestling, was in movies, TV, doing interviews, everything like that. He surpassed the wrestling business. He was such a big deal. And he had always been a good guy. It was always the red and yellow, eat your vitamins, say your prayers, work hard, and you will succeed America. His entrance theme was "I am a real American," and he was the biggest force and biggest personality in wrestling for good time in around a 20-year span. In the 80s and 90s, there was Hulk Hogan and there was everybody else. Everybody loved Hulkamania, but he had never been a bad guy, at least in his main area as Hulk Hogan. And you get this bigger than life personality. And look, it's not just the WWE, because he moved over to WCW, which was their main competition at the time, and was still the biggest babyface. It's not like everything changed when he just went to WCW. He was still the red and yellow. He was still, everybody loved him, everybody cheered him, until one fateful night in 1996, where he turned his back on the entire world. A little bit of historical, fact for that. In 1996, you've got, WCW, WWE, WWF at the time. The Monday Night Wars are going on, or are about to kick off, and have kind of started. You just had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash leave the WWE, two of their bigger stars, and move over to the WCW, which, in itself could consider itself to be a pretty huge heel turn if you're a WWE fan at the time. But they were just kind of bad guys doing bad guy things, which they kind of even did in the WWE. So it wasn't a huge step to see them as a couple of bad guys who are coming in and creating the Outsiders, which is what their team name was there, and kind of disrupting things in another company. It was kind of the same thing. But they always talked about a third. There was another person. They had a third man, and that came to a head in 1996, where they had just defeated two of the bigger baby faces in the WCW, and they're beating them up after the match. And lo and behold, here comes the real American Hulk Hogan, comes out in the red and yellow runs the bad guys off. And then all of a sudden, he turns around and looks at his friend on the mat and just puts a leg drop on him, becoming the third man of the Outsiders, which we now know as the NWO. If you're a wrestling fan, the NWO has spawned many groups like it since. He becomes Hollywood Hogan, and he goes from the red and yellow vitamins and prayers, good guy, all American, to this white and black clad Hollywood version that turns to shortcuts and spray paint, spray painting people, just tagging everything with spray paint, just to a bad guy, and one of the biggest bad guys in the entire world at the time. And this one is the one I think is the most, synonymous with what we just talked about as far as Robert Downey Jr., because again, you have Iron Man, the biggest hero in the universe, Hulk Hogan, who at the time was the biggest hero in the universe, leaves the WWE and still kind of has that, aura about him, which Robert Downey Jr., even after the death of Iron Man. Sorry if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame, spoilers, I guess. It's been a while. You should have seen it by now, regardless. And then all of a sudden comes back and turns as the biggest bad guy in the universe, because he was kind of the de facto leader of the NWO, the biggest name in the NWO. So those correlations are everywhere in this. So, and I know I kind of ranted a lot of other stuff, but heel turns are in every aspect. Wrestling, movies, as you can see, there have been other, I'm sure smaller things that in heel turns and stuff like that. And just in the essence of a movie, I don't know, because you haven't had a lot of cinematic universes before this. I don't know that there's a bigger one in a universe type situation as you do with Robert Downey Jr. So, and that's one of the reasons, again, that I wanted to do this list. I wanted to get this out there. Yeah. And that's just how we go. So thank you for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed my list. Let me know down in the comments if you agree with my list. If there was any other heel turns, I know there's some good honorable mentions in WWE that I looked at while doing some research on this one. Make sure you like and subscribe. Follow me at _ Big Mike 27 on all socials. Look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thank you guys.